What is up, guys? It's Larry with Critical Care Connection. Today we're coming at you with a topic that I hear a lot of talk about sometimes that has generally a lot of confusion around it. So what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about permanent pacemakers versus ICDs and what the differences are, why they're used, and then things for you to be able to assess what your patient actually has and then potentially what to look out for. So let's get into the live action right now. All right, guys, let's get into this. So let's talk about permanent pacemakers, PPMs, versus internal cardioverter defibrillator, ICDs. So let's straighten this out and let's figure out the difference in the two. So let's start with pacemakers first. So pacemakers are generally rhythms that are too slow for somebody to feel well and live life and do the things they're supposed to be doing. This is where a permanent pacemaker comes in. So a pacemaker is able to sense the patient's rate, and if it's too slow, it's able to kick in and say, oh, well, you need to be at this rate instead of barely alive rate here. And then it provides a signal through a wire that is now landing in the heart, and it speeds up that heart rhythm to what it needs to be life sustaining, life living, all the normal things, right? So generally, too slow rhythms. That's how you get a permanent pacemaker. What does it look like? So it essentially is something about the size of a stopwatch here. They vary in size, but they're all fairly small nowadays. So they make a little pocket under your skin here, right under your collarbone. And they make that pocket so that thing sits nicely in there. Most people, unless you're just rail thin, you won't even know that there's one sitting under there. So your pulse generator sits here. This is where the battery is. This is where all the smart things happen. So then you have a wire that runs down to the heart. And on that wire, you're going to have electrodes that are able to sense and determine what the pacemaker needs to do. Now, thinking about that pacemaker, there's several different ways that the wires can be. So you can have a single chamber pacemaker that sits down in that right ventricle. You can have a dual chamber, which is going to be your right atrium, right ventricle. And then there are also some devices that have 3 leads, which we'll talk about those a little bit more at the end, that can be combo devices between the two. I did want to mention when we were talking about permanent pacemakers, we're talking about leads. Now, on the market, there are some leadless pacemakers, and these things are tiny. I'm talking the size of a Tylenol pill, basically. And they attach directly onto the heart itself, and, they do their magic without any wires, and it just kind of sits there. So I'm sure in the near future we'll see more of these come into light, but for right now, there are some on the market for specific people and applications. Take a look at this one right here in my hand. It kind of gives you a better idea of what the actual size looks like, and it is freaking awesome. So now that we know that's what a pacemaker looks like, what does an ICD look like? Why is it different? What's different about it? So ICD, when you look at the device itself, there's not a whole lot of difference in the look of it. It has a pulse generator the same way the permanent pacemaker did. It's got a wire that runs down. Generally, you're going to have 1 or 2 wires depending on where it sits at. But now, if you have just a basic ICD, you're not using this to correct a rhythm that's too slow anymore. That's not what ICD does. ICDs are used to correct lethal rhythms. So generally, your lethal rhythms are going to be the ones that are too fast. They're very fast or very unorganized. So what the device is able to do is able to interpret what that rhythm is, and then able to provide a much higher energy shock to the heart to kind of reset everything and get it back, hopefully, in a normal rhythm. So your people that have recurrent VT, VF, for whatever various reasons that may be there for them, this is their kind of their 911 call. So it's not something hopefully they use ever, but it's there if they need it, and it can save their life. Does it feel good? They say it hurts like hell.
And I was sitting on the crapper. Killing time. I had done my business, and I was going through my cell phone, deleting pictures, and all of a sudden, I got really super lightheaded. I mean, big time. And the next thing I knew, man, it was like lights out, and wham, And I thought, I'm like, fuck. The next thing I knew, I was looking at the base of the toilet. I was completely folded in half. I was still sitting on the toilet. And I thought, what the fuck? Did I touch a fucking outlet or the light switch or something? Because I knew I'd gotten shocked. I've gotten shocked before. Um, so I'm no stranger to that. And then my wife came to the doorway because she heard the commotion. I guess I must have banged the toilet tank. And she asked me if I was all right. And then I felt fine, but I realized I got fucking whacked from the device.
Whacked him. Can't convince me that it didn't happen.
I don't know, never had one, but I can tell you from experience, I've shocked a lot of people with external pads, just like you see in, somebody getting CPR. They get hit with the Zoll through the pads, and then they kind of bounce up off the bed. Well, they're getting a very similar directed amount of energy, but it's internally versus externally. And they say it hurts. I've never had it, but people that have recurrent shocks at home, they don't want to do it over and over. And, rightfully so, this provides people with a righteous amount of anxiety. Is this going to happen? I'm worried. I'm waiting. Not a very fun time. So that's the difference in a pacemaker versus an ICD as far as what their jobs are. Now, kind of muddies the water a little bit, but now if you want to talk about, you have combo units, so you can have a pacer ICD combo. And the whole reason behind this is it's all dependent on what your patient's needs are. If that's what they need, then they can have both. They can have a pacer that paces when it needs to, but it's also got a defibrillator as a backup if it needs that as well. So when you're looking at somebody's EKG or their 12 lead that's up on the screen, if you're in a hospital setting, what you're going to be able to tell a lot of times is if the patient is pacing, you're going to look at where your pacer spikes are. And if you have a pacer spike that produces a P wave behind it, followed by a normal QRS, you're going to know that that patient has an atrial pace rhythm. Now, if they just have a pacer spike before your QRS and you have the spike and a QRS, now you're going to know that this is a ventricular pace. Can you have both? Solid question. Yes, you can. So you can have somebody that is AV paced as well. Now, that's what's going to tell you about your pacer. Now, not everybody uses a pacemaker all the time. This may just be intermittent, maybe when it needs. So you may not be able to look at it and say, oh, you've got a pacemaker. But if they're using it and using it normally, you can most certainly see that as long as your pacer detection is on whatever monitoring device that you have. If it's not turned on, more than likely you're not going to see it. So, can you tell that they have an ICD by the monitor? Generally not unless they get shocked by it. That's the only way you're going to be able to know that. So, it helps to know what kind of devices that your patients have. And a lot of these patients, they have cards, they know their stuff. They can tell you more about it than you're going to know about it most of the time because they're well versed in it. So we talked about how they're placed. We talked about how they work. So restrictions for activity, after they first have it placed, they've been sliced open here. A lot of times got skin glue. There's a lot of restrictions as far as weight. for several weeks before they can kind of start thinking about resuming to normal activity. But once they do, it's kind of body limiting after that. So they kind of get back in it and do their normal thing after that. So one thing we talked about when we get into these combo devices. So one thing you may run across, and it's not as common as a regular pacer or a regular ICD kind of setup, is some of these combo devices that are more prominent in the heart failure field. You're going to hear them called CRTs, and so it could be CRT-P or CRT-D. And that kind of denotes whether it's pacer driven or if it's a defibrillator driven as far as the device itself, or it could be both. But the whole purpose of that is a cardio resynchronizing therapy. So people with heart failure, they have a really hard time sometimes with their bottom ventricles beating at the same time. So they're out of sync just a little bit. So the purpose of these CRT type devices is that it helps them kind of coincide and beat together at the same time, which in somebody with heart failure, it is extremely important for them to be able to have a well-functioning or at least maximized pump, because that's their whole problem to start with, is they don't have great pump. So these devices, they deliver a kind of simultaneous shock to both ventricles that says, all right, let's do this together. We can get the most out of what we've got. And a lot of times this makes people with heart failure feel much better because now they're getting maximized pump out. So it does kind of muddy the water a little bit when we talk about pacer versus ICD. But knowing what each portion does when somebody has these combo devices, it makes life a lot easier for you to determine what you need to do or kind of what your mindset needs to be as far as your patient overall. So is there anything that stands out that you need to tell them to be aware of? Today's world of pacemakers and defibrillators are a lot better than they used to be. You used to see things that says, oh, don't go near a microwave, or don't go to airport security, or this or that. So all these things that create these kind of electronic fields of energy or magnetic energy, there are cautions on all this stuff, but most people can go out, and as long as your microwave's not on the fritz of blowing up or something crazy like that, you just do regular life. I think it's important in most of the devices is anything that has strong magnetic fields or anything like that. Don't go and take a magnet and hold it over the top of it, because that will definitely inhibit your ICD device. And if God forbid that you were holding it over while you needed it, it wouldn't be there to work for you. But as far as normal everyday living, most people go on, do their things. So talking about magnets, I think one of the biggest misconceptions in what I do, critical care stuff, I do a lot of stuff with end of life care. And I think one thing people, they see these little kind of donut shaped magnets, and they associate that with end of life care for people that have pacemakers. It doesn't benefit somebody that has a pacemaker to place a magnet on the pacemaker itself, because the magnet doesn't disable the pacemaker and make it stop pacing. The whole purpose of the magnet itself is for people that have a defibrillator. So when you place that magnet over the device, even if it's a pacer defibrillator combo or if it's just a defibrillator, basically what you're doing is you're inhibiting that device from providing a shock to a patient. So it doesn't, for somebody that's end of life and they're passing, having a pacemaker is not going to stop them from dying. But what we don't want to do is we don't want that device to provide shocks, if it's able to somebody at the end of their life. So that magnet just inhibits shocks from being delivered to a patient. It does not stop the pacing action of the device. So hopefully all these things together, I hope it's helpful for me to kind of lay it out so you can kind of see what I'm talking about and the differences, pacer versus defibrillator. And then if you guys have questions, concerns, comments, please reach out to me, ask them. I love when people ask questions because it just kind of sparks the conversation. So hit me up with any questions. I'm here for you all the time. Until next time, keep up the strong work. We'll see you then.